Hi to everyone listening to this Clinician's Corner presentation. My goal in creating this talk was to promote the use of the arts, particularly the visual arts, within therapy, as well as to discuss the benefits of incorporating the arts into therapy. My work experience as a clinical social worker is primarily in working in mental health with children under age 12 and their families. As such, a focus will be on using the arts within children's mental health. However, I feel this information would also be relevant for work with youth. My hope is that this presentation will give you some information regarding using art within therapy and a few tools to help you incorporate the arts into your clinical practice. Of course, I am not providing art therapy training, as that obviously takes quite a bit more than a PowerPoint presentation. But I hope this talk will get you thinking about how you may be able to use the arts alongside the other therapies you may be currently using in your work. I feel the arts can be complementary to pretty much any therapeutic technique. Within this presentation, I will be focusing specifically on how art therapy is complementary to a narrative therapy approach, as well as how the arts can foster the use and learning of mindfulness. I'll note that details of the references used in the presentation will be listed on the last slide. So, who am I? To introduce myself, my name is Kim Lees, and I'm a registered clinical social worker with the Saskatchewan Health Authority practicing in Saskatoon. I hold an MSW or Master's of Social Work from Dalhousie University, and I also have an advanced certificate in art therapy through the Vancouver Art Therapy Institute. I've been working in children's mental health services for about 6 years. I decided to pursue further training in art therapy for a variety of reasons, but primarily due to my interest in the arts in general and my curiosity as to how they could be used to enhance my therapeutic skills. I do not have an art background per se, and I only did art sporadically prior to being involved in my art therapy program. Through my training, however, I've realized that everyone is an artist, and we need to let go of our egos or preconceived notions of what is good or bad in terms of art, and just try it, because it really is, it's definitely therapeutic and can help a lot. Through my art therapy training, I experienced using art to process some of my own personal issues, which I found extremely powerful, and really that opened my eyes to the benefit and healing power of using the creative arts within therapy. So what will you learn from this presentation? Well, I hope something useful. I will start with a brief discussion of the theoretical background of using art in therapy, as well as cover some research on the benefits of using the arts in therapy and how this can assist with building relationships, externalizing problems, and fostering client empowerment. As I mentioned, I will also provide some discussion on how art can support learning the practice of mindfulness skills. I will hopefully address some questions you might have about using art in therapy, what skills are required, and will give some examples of how you can incorporate art into your practice. The focus will be on the use of visual arts, that is, drawing, painting, sculpting, and the like. Not to discount, there's also great therapeutic value in other types of expressive arts, such as music, dance, movement, creative writing, drama. Above all, using art in therapy also means thinking about what you might feel comfortable presenting to clients, which may be one or many of these expressive arts modalities. So I kind of use the word art as a collective in terms of thinking about visual art particularly, but also all the expressive arts. So the term art therapy is definitely a 20th century phenomenon, and it's often described as a hybrid discipline between the practice of art and psychology. However, it is evident that expressive arts have been considered to be healing throughout history and within many different cultures. Art is an important and universal facet of human expression, and it is as old as human civilization. As stated by Aaron Rubin, 2005, the use of art for healing and mastery is at least as old as the drawings on the walls of caves. Many psychological theories are postulated to have influenced art therapy, and the first considered to be Freud's psychoanalytic theory and Jungian analytic theory. Freud influenced art therapy with the idea that neurosis lay in the unconscious, and the only way to access this was through dreams, stream of consciousness dialogue, or art. Jung believed that art was the outward projection of inner experiences, including the unconscious, and could be used to gain insight and healing. Other psychological theories that influenced art therapy include Gestalt theory and Rogerian person-centered theory. Carl Rogers' daughter, Natalie Rogers, was a great proponent and practitioner of expressive arts therapy, and I would suggest, if you're interested in her work, to Google it. There are even videos on YouTube of clips of her sessions. There are also theories unique to art therapy, such as the expressive arts therapy continuum. I won't go into detail discussing all the psychological theories that influence this practice, but I invite you to consider what other practice theories could be paired with art in therapy. For example, consider how art could be used in a narrative approach, or solution-focused approach, or even with CBT. Is that possible? Another theory on how art therapy works is that problems become stuck due to restriction in the client regarding their range of play and suppression of imagination, both from which solutions are believed to emerge. In other words, within imagination, there are potentially limitless possibilities to solving problems, and imagination can be accessed more easily if you use art. Art therapy is unique because the therapeutic relationship includes not only the relationship between the therapist and the client, but also between the therapist, the client, and the art. The art is like a third entity to which both the therapist and the client also have a relationship with. Within the therapeutic relationship, the art therapist or the therapist not only provides witness to the art-making process, but also such things as the emotions that arise during the process, frustration, success, looking at things like problem solving, and fundamentally emphasizes what strengths the client is showing through creating art, as well as encouraging discussion about what feelings or behaviors have emerged. The therapist is there primarily to provide unconditional support and positive regard to the client through the art-making process, which hopefully goes without saying. You're not going to do art with kids and tell them that it's not good. Art therapy also gives more options for clients to express themselves. They can express emotions, narratives, memories, or anything else in a way other than verbally. And finally, I believe, and I think lots of kids do too, that art therapy and using art in therapy is fun. It brings play and creativity into the room, which can make it more appealing for the client to engage in. So why am I doing this talk? Why does it matter, kind of, this discussion? And why are we thinking about using tools other than verbal expression within therapy? So some thoughts you may have had or be having right now are, I don't need to use anything new. What I'm doing is enough. I'm already an expert at CBT or DBT or EMDR or some other acronym. And perhaps you think the arts are too fluffy for use in clinical practice. You might also think, I'm not good at doing arts. Or you might not have an interest in the expressive arts, which you probably, if not, you're not watching this. But anyway. You may also feel like you don't need to add something extra to your toolbox. But I hope through this presentation you will recognize that the arts can provide a great adjunct to the tools you already have. Unless you are a trained art therapist, you will be using art in your session as an addition to the other techniques you are already using. In my experience, as I said, art has the potential to enhance all forms of therapy. And as I mentioned, I had no background in art making and little experience prior to doing my art therapy training in doing art. But in many ways, I found that not having that formal art training, that is, having done art or taken classes, actually was a bit of a benefit, because in that way, I was, in most cases, starting where the client was at. And sometimes, often, the kids are much better than me in terms of doing art, and that kind of is a good thing for them, too. So some other questions you might have is, isn't talking enough? How will this enhance my practice? What do I do in a session when a client is art making? Do I just stare at them? Do I need formal training? And how will my client respond? So these are some other questions that I hope to cover during the course of this presentation. Now, there has been some research done, so I'm not just kind of talking here from my own experience. There's been a lot of research done on using art in therapy and the effectiveness of it. So some 3 H names there that I'll just leave for you to read identified several effects that art therapy had on individuals with mental health concerns. So there were several benefits that were reported in the study that were the participants' reports. And I'll qualify this study did have adult participants, Not to say there hasn't been studies done with children and youth, but this was one that I found that just gave a good summary of kind of the effectiveness overall of combining art and therapy. So firstly, what they found that was helpful was that it increased mindfulness and self-perception. Respondents reported that art making helped them focus on the present moment and be able to more keenly identify emotional responses. Art making also created experiences that enhanced connections between emotions and body awareness. And as many of us working with children and youth know, sometimes that's a difficult piece for kids to both identify emotions as well as identify the connection between their body and emotions. So this is great that this is something that people have found using art can help with that connection. Personal reflection. So participants reported that art making increased self-esteem as well as their sense of identity. Difficult emotions and situations could be viewed through art in a way that was felt safe for participants. And it was a way for them to be able to take a closer and more objective look at their problem. So using the art was almost like separating themselves from the problem a little bit, and I'll talk a bit more about that when I speak about the relationship between art and therapy and narrative therapy. In terms of emotional regulation, impulse control, participants said that art making offered a space to experience and experiment with new ways of dealing with difficult emotions. They also saw some changes in behavior. So they said that themselves, as well as those close to them, noticed a change in how they treated both themselves and others. And what the authors thought that this was related to art making allowing choices, what materials to use, what to create, how to create it, which increased the sense of empowerment as well as self-esteem. Now this is if you're able to give choices within the session, which is more, again, along the lines of doing an actual art therapy session. Sometimes using art in therapy you may be more directive, but there are times where you can give clients a choice of what kind of medium to use when you kind of have a directive. So you can still allow some choice in the process. Lastly, participants said that they got an increased insight and understanding of self. The art making allowed participants to explore emotions and experiences non-verbally, and this would often produce insights that were not there previously and just came out of the art making process. And then they could translate this into verbal explanation. So why use the arts with children and youth? Using the arts has the potential to be less threatening to children and youth. At times when they're asked to discuss the problem, they may feel unsafe or unsure, or even like they're quote-unquote bad. The arts provides a space between the child and the problem and can expand the ways they tell the stories of their lives. Note that the arts are also used to encourage talking in therapy. For those children who clam up, it can be a way to engage them in therapy and begin the process of opening them up to verbal dialogue. Specifically, it's been found that using the arts in therapy can assist in externalizing thoughts, feelings, events, and worldviews through artistic expression and subsequent storytelling, and to help therapists develop an effective relationship with children that supports reparation through the creative process of making art. And the people who these quotes are attributed to, you can just read them there. Children actively involved in drawing are more likely to verbally relate details and memories than children asked just to talk. And youth communicate more easily through non-verbal means and creativity. Sorry, you can hear me flipping pages here. My apologies. So again, some of this is a little bit repetitive from the previous slide, but just further points to consider when thinking of incorporating art into therapeutic practice. Malchiodi, and this is Kathy Malchiodi, she's come here and done a few, 3 workshops on using expressive arts therapy, particularly within clients who've experienced trauma. She's really kind of a guru in the art therapy world, so definitely would recommend checking out any of her books if you're interested in the topic. So she notes when working with children in therapy, introducing arts may be helpful because it reduces anxiety and helps children feel more comfortable, and it may increase memory retrieval, help children organize their narratives, or prompt children to tell more than they would solely during a verbal interview. So again, to quote Kathy Malchiodi, the arts provide a medium that enhances relationship between the client and the practitioner. So what she says is that all creative arts therapies are inherently relational therapies because they involve an active sensory-based dynamic between the practitioner and individual, and emphasize the right hemisphere to right hemisphere connection between child and therapist. So in this sense, art therapy can be helpful in repairing and reshaping attachment through experiential and sensory means, and may tap those early relational states that existed before words are dominant, allowing the brain to establish new, more productive patterns. She continues by stating that any professional who effectively applies art therapy principles to work with children is well versed in how to establish positive attachment, attunement, and reflective convergence, which I didn't understand, but I will explain. The latter referring to the experience in which two individuals feel felt by each other, and thus deeply understood and unconditionally accepted. So again, really emphasizing the fact that using art in therapy can help with building attachment and positive attachment. So as I previously discussed, art can be a powerful tool that moves the problem into the world of metaphor, where it can be addressed through narrative and storytelling. It also can assist the child to externalize the problem, so it is looked at as something that is exerting influence on them and them on it. So you might think, well, what's the benefit of that? But generally, children and some youth are what we would classify as involuntary clients. And that is their caregivers or the school or a doctor has decided they would benefit from mental health counseling. They may feel that they're in denial of the issue, or they may be embarrassed talking about it. Personally, I do tend to practice from a narrative stance, so I have a bit of a bias here. And the basis is what is stated there, that the person is not the problem is the problem. I find this takes the weight off the child or the youth. They are not the issue. It's anger, anxiety, defiance, or what have you. That's the issue. So art can be a way where we can literally externalize these problems. For example, clients can draw, collage, or paint what the issue is as something separate from themselves. Art can also use metaphor to further externalize the problem. Anger can become a temperamental tiger who can strike at the drop of a dime. Anxiety, a tornado that whisks up the client and makes them feel completely out of control. Defiance, a brick wall, and so on. So it not only gives kind of that externalizing, but also that idea of how the client really sees the problem, how they kind of picture the problem. And for, anger might be totally different from one child to another, one youth to another. So it's a very interesting way of kind of looking at the problem from a different perspective. I also find using art in therapy provides an activity that can take the focus off the child and their quote-unquote problem and move towards empowering the child and building resiliency. So I'm also big on kind of strength-based and positive-based approach. There is something in narrative therapy literature right now which is called the Wonderfulness Interview. I don't know if I talk about this. It's from the book Narrative Therapy in Wonderland, but I would really recommend people check that out because it's really a great way of taking the focus off the negative piece of why the child's coming in for therapy and really focuses on their positive and what strengths they have, not just strengths, but I guess we externalize those. They have skills and qualities which they can use to kind of help them work against the problem or defeat the problem. Got a bit off topic there, sorry. So when a child expresses their feelings through art, it can give them a safe outlet through an activity that's enjoyable to them. Also, having an adult witness their art making and provide positive feedback, not necessarily on the artwork itself per se, but on the skills and abilities shown by the child through creating the art can boost self-esteem. Art can focus on the child's strengths, resiliency, and support. It can provide an alternative to what may be a problem-saturated narrative that they have about themselves or that adults around them have propagated. The use of something enjoyable and in most cases pretty familiar to kids, such as art, as was previously mentioned, can therefore lessen the feelings of insecurity about the therapy process. All right, probably I've talked enough about how the benefits are of using art in therapy, but here's a few more. So for kids and youth, can direct the emotion into art versus acting out. It's a sensory experience incorporating both mind and body, which also can be regulating and promote mindfulness. There's some developmental issues it can assist with, kind of fine motor skills, that kind of thing. Promote some problem-solving skills, can help with increasing attention span, and can help develop strengths in coping with frustration. So, just for an example, perhaps for a child that's out of control at school, when we see them having control over the art materials, we can notice and emphasize this. There's a fair amount of literature regarding using art therapy with clients who've experienced trauma, which, although I will mention here, because it has been found to be extremely helpful and beneficial in both adult population and with kids, it's pretty much a presentation on its own, so I won't go into a lot of detail about that. Now, I talked about this kind of in my introduction, but one thing that I've been using a lot in my practice is the skill of mindfulness, and hoping to teach children this so it's something they can take from now to when they get older as a method for dealing with their emotions and any issues that they may be facing. So I've talked about kind of the ways that art can enhance practice and the benefits of it, but I also think it can help clients learn and practice skills of mindfulness. So most people may know this, but I'm going to reiterate it. Mindfulness practice is an activity that encourages awareness to emerge through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. Mindfulness has everything to do with examining who we are, with questioning our view of the world and our place in it, and with cultivating appreciation for the fullness of each of life's moments. And the citation is there at the bottom. So I kind of jumped here. Why am I now talking about mindfulness? I think because I do think that it's something really important. It's an important skill for both clinicians and clients to learn, and I'll talk a little bit about what's the big deal about it and why I've decided to throw it into here about when I'm speaking about art and therapy. So I'm going to just bear with me because there's going to be some brain talk here, and I did hesitate to kind of talk about all this, but I do think it's important to show the impressive impact of mindfulness practice to the brain. So I'm guessing most of you have heard the term neuroplasticity, which means the brain can change, even into adulthood. And children are lucky because they have particularly plastic brains. They're at a stage where the brain is still in a high level of growth and development. Studies have found that practicing mindfulness meditation can produce several changes to the brain. And there's a website that's stated there, which I'm going to quote from. Now, the author does add a disclaimer that the brain may change in these ways, but it's suggested and they have found this, but it does have to happen with consistent practice. So, again, some of this is like brainy talk, which hopefully isn't too much, but increased gray matter or cortical thickness in the following key areas. The anterior cingulate cortex. So this is a structure located behind the brain's frontal lobe. It's been associated with such functions as self-regulatory processes, including the ability to monitor attention and allow for more cognitive flexibility. So for those of us who work with children with, for example, ADHD, this is talking directly about that part of the brain that would be affected, right, in terms of that ability to, say, self-regulate, monitor attention, be cognitively flexible, all things that we often work with the children and youth that we're working with. Also impacts the prefrontal cortex, primarily responsible for executive functioning, planning, problem-solving, emotional regulation again. The hippocampus, part of the limbic system that governs learning and memory. It's extraordinarily susceptible to stress and stress-related disorders like depression or PTSD. So again, around that trauma piece, as well as mood disorders. And they also found that consistent practice of mindfulness meditation decreased amygdala size. So amygdala is what's known as our brain's fight or flight center, and it's the seat of our fearful and anxious emotions. Decreases in brain cell volume after mindfulness practice. So not only does the amygdala shrink post-mindfulness practice, but the functional connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are weakened. So this allows for less reactivity and also paves the way for connections between areas associated with higher order brain functions to be strengthened. So that's attention, concentration. So not only does it kind of shrink that part that does that fight or flight, it also allows kind of better connection, so the prefrontal cortex is doing more work. So again, I'll stress that the impact mindfulness exerts on our brain needs routine practice. So we have to develop the ability to take a step back, become more aware, more accepting, less judgmental, less reactive. Just like playing the piano over and over time strengthens and supports brain networks involved with playing music, mindfulness practice over time can make the brain, and thus us, more efficient regulators, pausing to respond to our world instead of mindlessly reacting. So it's all about that responding rather than reacting. So again, me advocating about mindfulness and the importance of it, and that was kind of talked in the brain talk there, but emotional regulation is definitely something that I think mindfulness can be helpful in helping kids learn how to regulate their emotions. So particularly in children's services, and I'm guessing maybe in youth as well, difficulties with self-regulation or emotional regulation is often one of the presenting issues our clients come to us with. So the authors that are quoted there surmise that self-regulation can be viewed from a top-down perspective. That is, using self-control, executive functioning skills, or cognitive flexibility, and it also can be influenced from the bottom up, which would include automatic influences such as stress, level of stress arousal, and anxiety. So these authors say that, so there's those two ways you can affect self-regulation. So top down, bottom up. And really an ideal intervention for promoting, sorry, I'm messing my words here, the development of self-regulation should work on both these levels. So they should exercise the top-down process of thinking and reflection on situations and actions, as well as mitigating any bottom-up influences such as anxiety, hyperarousal, or fight or flight responses. So these authors say that mindfulness practices encourage purposeful reflection that not only engages top-down processes that assist in self-regulation, such as sustained attention and cognitive flexibility, but also calms the bottom-up interference as it calms the nervous system. So it kind of works in both ways. Oh goodness, I sure have a lot of slides about this. So just read here again. I don't need to list these out. And there's several studies that have been quoted that show the benefits of mindfulness for children and adolescents. So the art therapies are posited to cultivate mindfulness, present moment awareness, compassion, and insight, while mindfulness fosters awareness of and attunement with the creative pulse of life itself. So art making in itself, if one engages in what is termed kind of the flow of creative process, which means like when you're really into something, it allows the client to hopefully experience being fully present in the moment. With children, the arts can provide a tangible, enjoyable way to explore mindfulness practices. Now, we've probably all experienced working with children when trying to teach them, say, deep mindful breathing, and often, well, in my case anyway, the child or parent reports, they don't like breathing, they don't want to practice it, I don't like it. So for some children, it is a difficult exercise to relate to, even though it's known the physiological and mental health benefits of deep mindful breathing are awesome, they do take practice. So if the child isn't interested in practicing it, it's not going to really help. So later in the presentation, I'm going to give some examples of art directives that can provide as well some help with doing mindfulness practice too. So one of the questions I posed at the beginning was, to use art in therapy, what type of training do I need? One of the authors I'd quoted before, Rappaport, 2014, suggests that using arts and mindfulness requires us to be open to learning it for ourselves first. So personally, by exploring mindfulness, whether through breath work, walking mindfully, or just trying to be present while completing day-to-day tasks, we can start to tune into the present moment, as well as start to notice when difficult feelings or experiences may come to us, and start to learn to just watch these and accept them rather than react. Practicing art while keeping this mindful awareness can help us understand how these two can be connected. Art making can also teach us how at times it may bring up emotional material, and then being mindful, how do we manage that? Doing our own practice can give us insight on how using the arts and mindfulness can bring about insight as well as calming and self-soothing. So I do definitely think doing some of this practice for yourself really will solidify the benefits of both mindfulness and art making as a therapeutic tool. Of course, there's formal training that would have to be undertaken to practice as an art therapist. But in my opinion, using art in therapy is something therapists can do if they have an interest and recognize that it can be an adjunct to the therapy they're already doing. So, I mean, this comes with a disclaimer. If you don't have the credentials, you can't say you're doing art therapy or you're an art therapist, obviously. And if you decide to use both mindfulness and art in session, I would think that one needs to be comfortable with both practices and have some familiarity with using art materials and practicing mindfulness. That doesn't mean we need to be like yogi, meditation experts, or artists, just that we have done a bit of personal work in both areas to gain insight and some comfortableness with it, as well as just some sense of how it can be helpful. Because if we see it's been helpful for us, we can have some, more insight into how it can be helpful for our clients. So another question I had posed is, sometimes you might wonder, well, how is my client going to feel about this? So my thought is, like the use of any therapy, I think if we're comfortable with using modalities, then we transfer this to our clients. I've experienced that most clients are very open to using art and creativity in session for the numerous reasons I've already covered through this presentation. I think having a clear sense of how art can be incorporated successfully into our work, as well as having openness to try something new and recognizing there may be some trial and error, is also important. Now, again, using art in therapy doesn't make you an art therapist, but you can still use art in therapy, if that makes sense, to enhance your practice. Now, one of the ways I suggest is maybe thinking about some directives that you could use that gets clients to address specific issues. So when you think about directives, it's important to reflect again on how art may be helpful to your practice. Because when engaged, art can be both therapeutic as well as a simple way to focus attention. It can invoke emotions and then pinpoint and analyze them. It can help us look creatively at thoughts. It can unearth or uncover honest self-reports in a non-judgmental way. We can maybe safely investigate a client's values or what's guiding them. And it just gives us a way to learn how to solve problems in new ways. So the first example of a directive I will present is the directive. It's come from the author that's there. Basically, it's asking the client to draw themselves as a tree. So I want you to look at this picture and think about what types of questions you might ask after the client has completed the picture. You might also wonder about how you would present this to the client, how you might kind of talk about doing this art exercise, how you might prompt the client, I guess. I want you also to think about what you would be doing while the client is drawing. What options would you have? And when you present the activity to the client, would you give a lot of instruction, or not be very specific? Well, how much direction would you give? Would you ask that the client include specific parts of the tree? And how can an art exercise like this connect with the work you already do? So unfortunately, because there's only me and Leah on this presentation, you can't see that though, I can't get your answers about this, but I hope you may be thinking about this, maybe talking to your screens, or at least considering the questions I posed on the previous slide. Now, at first, it seems a bit awkward to just be sort of present while a client is completing an art piece. So there's several things that I kind of recommend as do's and don'ts in terms of what to do when a client is engaging in art making. So I'm going to start with the don'ts. I would suggest do not talk the entire time or ask a lot of questions about what they're doing unless it seems this is what the client wants to do. So sometimes kids will talk about something totally different when they're doing art, and they actually talk more when they're doing art because it almost gives that intermediary where it's not like the focus is on what they're saying, it's the focus is on the art. So that's kind of a, you have to take the client's lead on that one, as you do for most things. Don't close your eyes and say you're practicing meditating, for example, fall asleep. That's supposed to be a joke. Don't give ongoing directions or suggestions about the creation of the picture. If the child is stuck, you can ask them, where would you like to start, at the top or the bottom? What color would you like to start with? So you really want this to come from the client. You don't want to do like specific directives, like where's the branches? Why haven't you done this? Why is this too small? Like that kind of thing. I really recommend there is some schools of thought where there are therapists that do their own art alongside. I don't know. I think that can be distracting for a client, and it's really not making you fully engage with what they're doing. So even doodling or being distracted some way, like taking notes, just be aware that that could be distracting for the client and be impacting on the art that they're creating and the experience they're having within that creation process. I would really save your questions for the end, just because, again, the questions can potentially interfere with their creation or kind of the experience of the art making. Now, do's, I would use the time to give the client your undivided attention and positive regard. So this just means like you can sit there, watch what they're doing, give some feedback, comment on the colors they're using. It's almost a bit like play therapy where you do kind of a descriptive commentary, although a little bit less. You don't want to, comment on everything, but you for sure can make some positive feedback and comments. That just shows that you are engaged and noticing what the client is doing, and you are providing that unconditional positive regard. You can offer assistance. Sometimes kids need that. So if they need to find certain colors or materials or have a question or need help, it's just up to them to ask, though. And I do say be comfortable sitting and observing the client's process. So just think of this almost as this is your practice in being present and mindful, because you really have to show that as well. Now, I did see I talked about this before because I wasn't following my notes, and now I see I did write some art therapists do artwork alongside the client, would draw their own tree. Sometimes I do that just as an example, like I'll just do a quick kind of rough drawing, and it can just show that we're all different. I don't usually do it while the client's creating because I find sometimes kids feel like my picture is quote-unquote better. So that's why I usually do kind of like a rough, not great thing, because it can be an icebreaker and it can just show what I'm kind of looking for in terms of what pieces of the directive, if needed. Yeah, and what I said is I usually do like a stickman version of a tree, so to speak. So that's kind of, you got to play it by ear. All right, so what do we talk about after? It was thought at one time that therapists could interpret clients' art, and even now I'm asked by parents, teachers, other clinicians to do so. You may have some ideas about the content, but that always needs to be confirmed with the client. Everyone, even a child, is the expert in their own artwork. Children will sometimes ask me to guess what they have drawn. Actually, quite a lot they do, and I try really hard not to because I don't want to put my own interpretation on the piece. I often just say, I don't know, I'm really bad at guessing, or I may make like a totally left field guess just kind of get them to tell me, but it's interesting. Kids seem to want that, so that's when I'm still learning on how to navigate. So here's a sample of some questions you could ask. Tell me about your tree. What kind of tree is it? Your trunk appears, what does the trunk represent? Does it represent anything? How does it relate to the client? What are these things on the tree? So again, not sort of saying these leaves or these flowers or whatever it is, letting the client provide that interpretation. If you give a title to the drawing, what would you call it? If your tree could talk, what would it say? It looks like your tree is, big, small, bright, dull, colorful, not. Again, we just want to comment on the actual visuals that are there, like size, shape, color. Again, staying away from interpretation. And again, this is maybe getting a little bit more into the art therapy world piece of it, but it's really that point of just we don't want to interpret the art for the client. So you can even leave that out if you feel like that's a bit too much. And lastly, I'm wondering how you feel about your tree and how is this tree like you? So I do have a link on the bottom of the slide there, and it was another perspective, and it kind of was talking about a similar directive. So I just want to share what the authors said. They said, everyone, no matter their level of artistic skills, for the most part can visualize and draw or paint a tree. It's a simple and familiar part of nature that easily lends itself to the way we ourselves grow and mature, yet remain grounded in the present moment. In this directive, the client is asked to draw a tree, but there is much more specificity added to the direction. They suggest the clients create a tree within the context of looking at their own lives, and then to witness and examine the thoughts and emotions that come to the surface, without dwelling or giving them too much emphasis. Again, that's looking at the mindfulness piece, right? And that might be more relevant to adolescents, I'd say, than kids, just because they're really asking for a little bit more depth there, aren't they? So in this suggested directive, the branches are connected to many parts of our lives that develop over time, social groups, goals, families, and the exercise can delve into the client's inherent strengths. So trees have strength from their roots, and we look at the importance of the connection between the person's strengths, which is their roots, the body could be their trunk, and the lifestyle, which is the surrounding environment. So again, that is putting a little bit more within the directive, making it a little bit more complex, but just some other thoughts of how you could expand on this, I guess. Oh, what did I do here? Oh, here we go. So, what was the purpose of this exercise? Well, I've already given you the first one. So, to develop self-awareness, and if in a group, learning about other group members. It's a chance to explore uniqueness, diversity, and identity. So I'm hoping you're thinking of some other purposes before I get them on the screen, but here's the next one. This sometimes could be like an introductory exercise or an engagement exercise to learn more about the client. And you can ask the client what they wish was different about their trees. So, I mean, there's lots of ways you could go with this. Be creative yourself in terms of kind of opening discussion to indirectly talking about what the client may want to change. So kind of hearkening back to the previous slide about thinking about the environment the tree's in, we can also ask, where is this tree growing? What's around it? What does this tree need to be healthy and strong? What weakens the tree? So again, just bringing in some other kind of questions you might have, but you're doing it in a way where you're using metaphor and the focus is on the tree, not necessarily the problem per se. Okay, so bear with me. I have a lot of notes for this slide, but I want to introduce an art directive that is thought to focus on developing mindfulness. The author's quoted, and there's the quote there, and then I also have a link to a website as well. Discuss that mindfulness and art can be combined through a simple exercise where a client concentrates on their breath, then chooses the color, and draws a line coordinated with their in-breath. Now, it's good to choose a second color to coordinate with their out-breath. So to do this, the client would have to hold different colors in opposite hands, which also has some benefit because it stimulates the brain and body bilaterally. So you would say, for this one example, your in-breath is maybe the blue, your out-breath is the black. And there actually is, now I'm just thinking about this, a blue-black exercise where you're breathing in calm, breathing out anger. And we can see that kind of, if you think about colors relating to emotion, blue might be related to kind of a calm feeling and black to an angry feeling. So there is actually a blue-black breathing exercise. If anyone's interested in that, I can send details about it. It's from a book called Art Therapy and Anger by Marion Liebman. I just twigged on that one. So what we really want the client to do is notice how it feels in their body after doing this breathing exercise. The client can play with breathing in different manners, for example, doing a longer out-breath, which is actually thought to be a really great way of breathing, and then reflect on how this feels in the body. So there's a website at the bottom which talks about a similar activity, and from that website the directive is, the art exercise will help you be more aware of your breathing and to connect with the natural rhythms of your body. You can use any drawing medium, so pencils, markers, oil pastel, or chalk, and any size paper, but they say they prefer a large sheet of paper to encourage space for deep breath. There's no right or wrong way to do this type of art. Just focus on what feels natural for you. Place your pencil or drawing medium on the paper. Visualize your breath as a line and represent this on the paper. Spend a few minutes playing with different types of lines as you notice the breath. Try altering your breathing a bit faster or a bit slower, and then notice how this changes your lines on the page. Try changing the quality of your lines, and notice how you could change your breath to match. And then they have a second piece of the exercise where they take a new sheet of paper and really focus then on deep, slow breathing for relaxation. So drawing lines that represent calming breath. So you may like to pause on the inhale and then draw the exhale. So just keeping it, that one they suggest just using one color and just really a continuous line. You can kind of just imagine that, hey, like a line when you inhale, pause, and then a line when you exhale. And even that motion, that kind of rhythmic motion, just can help relax into kind of the calming sensation of the breath and the movement, and also the visual as well. You could also have the client do it with their eyes closed, so that's another option too. So for myself, I think for some clients, we would need to explain and demonstrate what slow, calming breathing is prior to starting this whole exercise. So I would maybe sit with the client and examine the picture, and oh, this is something else I might do afterwards, my apologies. So after this picture's been done, kind of a fun thing you can do is sit with the client and try and pick out any shapes or figures within the picture, or if they feel the picture looks like anything. I mean, this one kind of looks like a bunch of scribbles here, but I'm sure you can kind of pick out maybe like a face or like a tree or a flower, you know, so kids come up with interesting stuff, right? And then another inquiry would discuss the importance of breath and what does the picture tell us about our breath. So, of course, this exercise can be tailored as to how you'd like it. Again, I think that it's really important to bring your own sense of creativity into these. But I hope that this gives a little simple example of how art can facilitate mindfulness, and mindfulness can contribute to art making. So expressive arts therapy is also something therapists themselves can use to assess stressful situations and can be a way to look at what coping mechanisms we use. So the author cited on the slide talks about drawing that focuses on empowering the therapist. And this is something also that could be used with the client as well. So when we think about reflecting on something that has bothered you, a situation that you felt has caused stress, maybe in your work or even your personal life, and this could be related to interactions with a client, a colleague, or something else. So things to ask yourself are, could you draw a shape or a color that signifies to you what happened? Could you draw the event or the feelings that are causing you stress? Or, more generally, could you draw what's bothering you at present? Now, this author suggests using oil pastels. Oil pastels are quite nice because they're less controllable, but they're really smooth. And the theory is that using a medium like that can evoke a little bit more emotion than something that is more controllable. But it also allows a variety of intensity in terms of color, shading, lines, etc. But really, you can use any type of pencil, pen, whatever. So what the author thinks is that putting the situation into visual form is that you can see that there may be many stresses that are in the situation, but the act of drawing allows you to refocus on the issue and perhaps take a fresh or different look at it. You know, the situations are just sitting with you and bothering you, so this may be a way to kind of get that out and like really look at it objectively. So you have to choose what to draw, and then the second piece is to explain the drawing in words, right? So they say draw an image of a stressor and then describe what's been drawn. So you not only choose what to draw, but you also have to figure out what words you're going to use to explain the drawing. That's step 2. And if you're not sharing verbally with somebody else, a client would share with you, of course, you can write it on the back of the drawing as an explanation of what was pictured. And then I would suggest, if you're doing this on your own, reading it aloud to yourself, just to kind of put in perspective the stressor, what's happened, and it just may give you some perspective that you might not have had before. So the next piece of this exercise is to look at what's called deconstructing what's present in the picture. So rather than the content, look at the drawing itself. What's the focus? What colors were used, shapes, sizes, shading, repetition, space, size of objects, the relationship with other objects in the background. What is added that might be unrelated? Or was there something omitted in terms of details? So when you look at a picture this way, you're engaging more with the how the picture was created rather than the what was drawn. So we're moving from the description of the content, which is the verbal piece, to the composition. So in this article, it talks about a social worker who had worked in a wartime situation, and this was one of the subjects in the study. And she noted that her drawing showed her separated from what was around her, and that she felt fragmented or torn between many responsibilities. She noticed she drew herself as a central figure and that she looked almost transparent, which she reflected was indicative of her feeling overwhelmed and ineffective because of her stresses, as well as her fear of war itself. So that's an example of how one social worker used it to kind of reflect on what happened and how she was kind of managing and coping. So the final stage, though, is to look at envisioning solutions or ways of coping with the stress or the issue at hand. And that involves altering the image to show a solution to coping with the problem or the stress related to the problem. So this may include altering the image itself or shifting the meaning associated with the image. For example, looking at a figure as sad rather than angry. Or another way of changing the image would to be add imagined senses such as movement, touch, smell, etc. So it's really looking at how can the image be changed to that sense of overwhelm from whatever the stressful situation was, what's creating the stress, to how am I going to manage and cope, and how can I change this image to show that. So we're close to ending here, Now, we're not going to watch this movie right now because I think it's quite long, but it is something you can watch on your own time if you're interested. And it's not necessarily about art and mindfulness, but it's more about how just art is empowering. And it's a good overview of kind of the practice of art therapy. I found it quite good. It's a TED Talk, so I'm sure that gives it street cred of some sort. If I don't know if you can get the link through here, but you can just Google the title there. And if you can't figure that out, just feel free to email me and I can send you the link. So I'm done. Almost just an hour on the nose here. Okay, in conclusion, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope you made it to this slide. I do hope it's given you some material to think about in terms of incorporating the visual arts and mindfulness into your therapeutic practice, and perhaps into your own life as a clinician as a method of self-care. So pictured on this slide are works from a recent group I co-facilitated. Well, it was a little while back now, but it was using expressive arts therapy with children who had been subject to traumatic events. The directive we had was for them to paint an image that symbolized hope and gratitude. So it's interesting because when we look at it, several of the pictures include similar elements. You can see there's kind of what look like tree figures in several of them. Now, whether that was just related to kids sitting beside each other or whether that had something else, we can't quite say, right? But I think these pictures, and even working in that group, we got great feedback from the group, by the way, which was awesome. But these images demonstrate the diversity and amazing creativity that children can bring forth when art is introduced as a therapeutic tool. So I just think it's really amazing and awesome and awe-inspiring. And for me, using art in therapy has really also reinvigorated me in terms of my own engagement in the therapeutic process too, because I think it's such a nice thing to bring into therapy. So last but not least, here are my references. I believe you could probably pause this, or I think Leah will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint slides. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me via email or phone. And thank you so much for listening.